Imagine you're sitting in the cockpit of a Supermarine Spitfire, somewhere over the gray waters of the English Channel. On a summer morning in 1942, the engine is screaming at full throttle. The coastline of occupied France is shrinking in your mirror, and a single German bullet, one bullet, fired by a lone soldier from a beach far below, has just pierced your radiator. You can feel the aircraft dying underneath you. The temperature gauge is climbing. The glycol coolant is bleeding out into the slipstream. You have maybe 2 minutes of engine power left, and the English coast is 12 miles away. You key your radio transmitter. Your voice is calm, almost impossibly calm. This is it, chaps. And then the greatest fighter pilot the Royal Air Force had produced in 2 years of war tilts his nose toward the water and disappears. He was 21 years old. He was a wing commander. He had 26 confirmed aerial victories, and by some accounts more than 30. He had been decorated 4 times. Newspapers called him the Spitfire Ace. His photograph had appeared on the front pages of papers from London to Sydney to New York. He was arguably the most famous Allied airman alive, and he was Irish, from a country that had officially decided this was not its war. This is the story of Brendan Eamon Fergus Finucane, known to the world as Paddy, known to the Luftwaffe as a nightmare they could not wake up from, and known to history as a man who refused to let geography decide the limits of his conscience. To understand why Paddy Finucane's story carries the weight it does, you have to understand what Ireland was doing while Europe burned. When Adolf Hitler's Wehrmacht rolled into Poland on the 1st of September, 1939, and Britain and France declared war 2 days later, the Irish Free State, the 26 counties that had won independence from Britain just 17 years earlier, made a different choice. Taoiseach Eamon de Valera announced that Ireland would remain neutral. He called it the policy of the emergency. To the Irish government, after centuries of British rule, after the brutality of the War of Independence, after the blood spilled in the Irish Civil War, staying out of Britain's war was not cowardice. It was sovereignty. It was the exercise of a hard-won right that thousands of Irishmen had died to secure. De Valera would maintain that neutrality with remarkable discipline throughout the entire conflict. Ireland did not join the Allies. It did not join the Axis. German diplomats operated in Dublin, so did British ones. German U-boat crews wrecked on the Irish coast were interned. Allied airmen who crashed on Irish soil were also interned, technically, though many were quietly walked to the border and released. Ireland was playing an extraordinarily delicate game, balancing between an empire it resented and a fascism it quietly feared. The result was that tens of thousands of young Irish men and women found themselves in a strange moral limbo. Their country was not at war. Their government would not send them to fight. But across the water, the civilization that had produced Beethoven and Shakespeare and Michelangelo was being systematically dismantled by a regime that burned books and murdered children. And for many of those young Irish men and women, the question was simple. It did not require a government directive. It required a mirror. Somewhere between 40,000 and 70,000 Irish citizens, citizens of a neutral nation, volunteered to serve in the British Armed Forces during the Second World War. They came from farms in County Kerry and factories in Dublin and fishing villages in Donegal. They left without fanfare, often without their government's blessing, and in some cases with its active disapproval. After the war, de Valera's government would deny returning Irish veterans the benefits given to their British counterparts. For years, these men were treated as an embarrassment, a contradiction, men whose sacrifice did not fit the official narrative. Paddy Finucane was one of them, but he did not walk to the border and slip across quietly. He did not wait for war to come to him. He had made his decision before the war even started. Brendan Finucane was born on the 16th of October, 1920, in Rathmines, a comfortable suburb of Dublin, the eldest of Andrew and Florence Finucane's 8 children. His father, Andy, was a man of deep political conviction. He had fought in the 1916 Easter Rising against British rule. He had been active in the Irish Republican movement during the War of Independence. He was, in every conventional sense, a nationalist, a man who had put his body between Ireland and the British Empire. And yet Andy Finucane would live long enough to see his son put on a Royal Air Force uniform and fly for that same empire. And he would be proud, because Andy Finucane understood something that ideologues often forget: that principles are not the property of nations, that fighting against tyranny is not the same as fighting for any particular flag, that a man's conscience belongs to him alone. The family moved to England in 1936, settling in Richmond, Surrey, when Brendan was just 15. Andy had found work, and England offered opportunity. For young Brendan, now surrounded by British culture, by the noise and energy of a country that still believed in itself, something began to crystallize. He became fascinated by aircraft, not just as machines, though they were extraordinary machines, but as extensions of will, as the ultimate expression of a person's intention imposed on the physical world. He read everything he could find about aviation. He visited airfields. He watched the RAF display teams perform at air shows with an intensity his friends noticed and his family indulged. In September 1938, exactly 1 year before the war began, 17-year-old Brendan Finucane walked into a Royal Air Force recruiting office and signed his name. He was not a British citizen. He was an Irish national, the son of a man who had fought against British rule. But none of that mattered to him. He wanted to fly. He wanted to fly Spitfires. And when war came, as it was obviously going to, he wanted to be ready. The RAF accepted him. He was physically gifted, 5'7", compact and athletic, with exceptional eyesight and the kind of spatial awareness that cannot be taught. But his early training was not a story of instant genius. Finucane struggled with instrument flying. He found formation work difficult at first. His instructors noted his determination, but also his impatience. He wanted to be in the air, doing things, not sitting in classrooms learning theory. He was commissioned as a pilot officer on the 22nd of July, 1940. Within weeks, he was assigned to 65 Squadron, flying Spitfires from Hornchurch in Essex. The Battle of Britain was underway, and Paddy Finucane was about to become someone. The Battle of Britain, for those unfamiliar with its scale, was one of the defining military campaigns of the 20th century. From July to October of 1940, the German Luftwaffe attempted to destroy the Royal Air Force and achieve air superiority over Britain as a precondition for a seaborne invasion. At its peak, Fighter Command was losing pilots faster than it could replace them. Aircraft production was heroic, but barely adequate. The pressure on young men in Spitfires and Hurricanes was almost incomprehensible. Fighter Command had approximately 1,100 operational pilots. At the start of the battle, between July and October, they lost 544 killed and hundreds more wounded. The average operational life expectancy for a new pilot during the battle's most intense phase, mid-August through mid-September, was measured in weeks, sometimes in days. Some men arrived at their squadrons, flew their first combat mission, and did not come back. Some lasted 1 week. Some lasted 2. Against that backdrop, Finucane's development as a fighter pilot was extraordinary. He claimed his first confirmed kill, a Messerschmitt Bf 109, in September 1940. Then another. He was learning at an accelerating rate, absorbing the brutal lessons of combat at a speed that astonished his squadron mates. He was aggressive, almost frighteningly so. He had a talent for closing to very short range before firing, ranges that made other pilots nervous, and his gunnery was becoming devastatingly accurate. He understood instinctively something that many pilots never fully grasped, that a short burst from 100 yards is worth 10 times more than a long burst from 400. By the end of 1940, he had 5 confirmed kills. In the RAF's informal accounting system, 5 kills made you an ace. Paddy Finucane was 20 years old, and he was already an ace. But the Battle of Britain was only the beginning. In February of 1941, Finucane was posted to 452 Squadron of the Royal Australian Air Force. This was a new squadron, recently formed and not yet blooded in combat. The Australians were tough, irreverent, and deeply suspicious of anything that smelled like British officer-class pretension. Finucane was Irish. That was close enough to an outsider for them to trust him immediately. He became their flight commander. And what happened next was something that veterans of the squadron would talk about for the rest of their lives. Finucane did not just teach these men to fly. He taught them to survive. He drilled them endlessly in the tactics he had developed through hard experience. He insisted on discipline and formation, on communications protocol, on the crucial importance of watching each other's tails. He explained to them, with the patience of someone who had already seen too many friends die, that the pilot who died first in most combats was the one who was not watching behind him, that the Messerschmitt you could see was not the one that would kill you, that the one you needed to fear was the one you never saw coming. He pushed them hard. He also flew with them constantly, leading from the front with a personal example that was sometimes reckless and always inspiring. He was not physically imposing. He was not a loud man or a braggart. But there was something in his manner, a quietness that contained absolute certainty, that other pilots found magnetic. When Paddy said they were going to do something, men who had every reason to be frightened found themselves believing they would be fine. His kill count was climbing. February 1941, March, April, May. Each month brought new patrols, new sweeps over occupied France, new encounters with Luftwaffe pilots who were experienced, well-equipped, and fighting over their own territory, which gave them the crucial advantage of knowing that if they went down, they would be prisoners rather than dead. The RAF pilots flying offensive sweeps over France had no such comfort. Going down over France meant capture or death. And still Finucane went. Every day, every mission he was assigned and many he volunteered for. By the summer of 1941, he had 15 kills, then 18, then 20. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross in June. By September, he had earned a bar to his DFC, a second award. By October, he had a second bar, 3 DFC awards in 4 months. The Air Ministry was struggling to keep up with the rate at which this young Irish pilot was accumulating citations. He was also becoming famous. In a war that desperately needed heroes, real ones, not manufactured ones, Paddy Finucane was a genuine article. The press found him irresistible. The story wrote itself. The Irish boy from neutral Ireland who had volunteered before the war even started. The son of an IRA veteran who was now flying for the RAF. The quiet, devout Catholic. He carried a rosary in his cockpit and attended Mass whenever he was on the ground, who was simultaneously one of the most dangerous fighter pilots in the European theater. He was uncomfortable with the attention. He gave interviews when required, was polite and modest with journalists, and then went back to flying. The fame, the photographs, the newspaper headlines, none of it interested him. What interested him was the mission. There was also something else driving him, something more personal than doctrine or patriotism. His younger brother, Kevin, had also joined the RAF. Kevin was flying night fighters. The two brothers were close, genuinely close, in the way that Irish Catholic families of that generation often were, bound by faith and blood and an unspoken understanding of each other. Paddy worried about Kevin. He wrote to him regularly. When Kevin was posted at different stations, Paddy followed up through back channels to make sure he was all right. The older brother instinct, undimmed by rank or reputation. And there was something else. Paddy Finucane had grown up watching fascism rise. He had been a teenager when the Spanish Civil War was fought. He had been 17 when the Anschluss swallowed Austria. He had been 18 when Munich happened, and 19 when Poland burned. He was not an abstract idealist. He had watched year by year as a specific and concrete evil consolidated its power over an entire continent. His faith, deep, sincere, and non-performative, told him that evil was real and resistance to it was not optional. It was moral obligation. This is what the newspapers could not quite capture. They saw an ace pilot, a handsome young man with a shamrock painted on his Spitfire, a great score and a better story. What they did not fully grasp was that Paddy Finucane was not flying for glory. He was flying because he believed someone had to, because someone always has to, because the comfort of sitting in a neutral country and watching the world burn had never, for even a single moment, presented itself to him as a real option. The shamrock deserves a word. At some point in 1941, Finucane had a small green shamrock painted on the nose of his Spitfire. It was not an official marking. It was personal, a statement. An Irishman flying for Britain was a complicated enough proposition, but the shamrock was Finucane's way of making sure no one ever forgot where he was from. He was not pretending to be British. He was not hiding his identity or his heritage. He was an Irish pilot, flying a British aircraft, fighting a German Air Force, in a war his country officially refused to enter. The shamrock was his signature, a reminder that conscience is more powerful than geography. German pilots began to recognize it. Reports filtered back, through intelligence channels and through captured aircrew, that Luftwaffe pilots had been briefed about the Spitfire with the Shamrock, that they were warned about its pilot. In the air war over the Channel in northern France, where the same pilots often met each other repeatedly across days and weeks of operations, reputation mattered. And Finucane's reputation was simple. He was someone you did not want on your tail. In April of 1942, at the age of 21, Paddy Finucane was promoted to wing commander. He was given command of the Hornchurch Wing, 3 full squadrons of Spitfires, over 30 aircraft, nearly 100 pilots. He was the youngest wing commander in the Royal Air Force. Some of the men under his command were older than he was, veterans who had been flying since before he had his wings. And they followed him. They followed him because of what they had seen, because they had watched him fly with absolute precision and absolute aggression into situations that should have been fatal and come out the other side, because he briefed every mission with clarity and flew every mission with courage, because he was not asking them to do anything he was not willing to do first. His personal score by the spring of 1942 stood at 26 confirmed kills, with more probably unconfirmed or unshared. It placed him among the very highest-scoring Allied pilots in the Western Theater. He had survived more than 200 combat sorties. He had been shot up multiple times, landed damaged aircraft, nursed bleeding engines back across the Channel. Every scar on his Spitfires was a story that should have had a different ending. The 15th of July, 1942, began as an ordinary operational day. The Hornchurch Wing was tasked with a low-level sweep of the coast of northern France, what the RAF called a rhubarb mission. These were offensive operations designed to harass German installations, keep pressure on the Luftwaffe, and demonstrate that the RAF owned the sky over Channel. They were also among the most dangerous missions the RAF flew. Low altitude meant less time to react, less margin for error, and exposure to every German soldier on the ground with a weapon pointed upward. The weather was reasonable. The operation proceeded without major incident. The wing made its runs along the French coast, encountered some light flak, and turned for home. Finucane had done this dozens of times. He knew the routine. He was leading his formation back across the Channel when it happened. A single German soldier on the beach at Point du Touquet, 1 man, 1 rifle, or perhaps a light machine gun, fired a burst at the passing Spitfires. Most of the rounds went wide. One did not. One round struck the radiator of Finucane's Spitfire, puncturing the glycol cooling system. In a liquid-cooled engine like the Rolls-Royce Merlin, the loss of coolant is a death sentence for the power plant. Without glycol, the engine overheats within minutes. It seizes. It stops. And a Spitfire without a running engine is a very beautiful, very aerodynamic brick. Finucane called it in. His wingman, Sergeant Al Aikman, pulled alongside and confirmed what Finucane already knew. Coolant was streaming from the belly of his aircraft. The coast of England was 12 miles away. 12 miles is nothing in a Spitfire at altitude, at low level, with a dying engine, with the temperature climbing every second. 12 miles might as well be 1,200. He did the math. He knew the answer. He keyed his radio transmitter. His voice, by every account of those who heard it, was completely calm, not forced calm, not the brittle calm of someone fighting panic. Simply calm. The calm of a man who had flown 200 combat sorties and had long since made his peace with the possibility that any one of them might be his last. This is it, chaps. His Spitfire hit the water of the English Channel at approximately 3:15 in the afternoon. The aircraft sank immediately. The impact was violent. No parachute, no ditching procedure had time to take effect. Sergeant Aikman circled the spot, hoping to see something. A life vest, a hand, movement in the water. There was nothing. The Channel is cold in July. The current is strong. And a Spitfire that goes in at speed leaves very little behind. Air-sea rescue launches were sent to the coordinates. They found nothing. Paddy Finucane was 21 years old, 6 weeks shy of his 22nd birthday. His body was never recovered. The English Channel, which he had crossed so many hundreds of times in life, became his grave. The news hit the RAF like a physical blow, not because the loss of pilots was unusual. It was tragically, horrifyingly usual by that point in the war. But because Finucane had seemed to the men who flew with him and the public who followed his career somehow beyond reach. He had survived so much. He had come back so many times from situations that should have killed him. There was a superstitious belief, irrational, human, but deeply felt, that men like Paddy Finucane simply did not die, that some combination of skill and luck and force of personality would always bring them home. The BBC broadcast the news. The newspapers carried it on their front pages. In Dublin, in the neutral country that was officially not part of this war, people wept. The Irish press and the Irish Independent both carried extensive tributes to a young man whose government could not officially mourn him as a soldier, but whom the public recognized immediately as one of their own. Letters poured in from across Ireland to the Finucane family in Richmond, from people who had never met him, from families of other Irish volunteers who understood, in his death, the weight of what their own sons and brothers were carrying. His father, Andy Finucane, the old Republican, the Easter Rising veteran, gave a statement to press. It was simple and it was devastating. He said that his son had done what he believed was right, that a man could ask no more of himself, that he was proud. His brother Kevin survived the war. He lived until 2002 and spent 60 years carrying the weight of his brother's memory. He spoke rarely about Paddy in public. When he did, the grief in his voice was undimmed by decades. What Paddy Finucane left behind was not just a kill score or a service record. He left behind a way of being, a demonstration in real and irreversible flesh and blood of what it meant to make a moral decision in the absence of institutional support. Ireland did not send him. His country did not ask him to go. No government directive pointed him toward a recruiting office. He went because he chose to. At 17 years old, a year before the war even started, he looked at the world and decided that waiting was not something he was able to do. He changed things. His influence on the tactics and culture of RAF Fighter Command, particularly in the offensive sweep operations over France in 1941 and 1942, was real and documented. The pilots he trained and led became, in many cases, excellent combat flyers who carried forward the lessons he had taught them. The Australians of 452 Squadron idolized him and flew better for having been led by him. The Hornchurch Wing, under his command, was among the most effective in fighter command. But his influence went beyond tactics. It went to the question of who we are when no one is requiring us to be anything at all. In every generation, in every conflict, there are moments when official structures and national boundaries fail to capture the full moral landscape of a situation. When the right thing to do and the officially sanctioned thing to do are not the same thing. In those moments, most people wait. They wait for permission. They wait for the situation to clarify. They wait for someone else to go first. And some people, a very few, do not wait. They decide. Paddy Finucane decided. He decided at 17, and he spent the next 4 years making that decision real every morning, in a cockpit over the Channel and the coast of France, until one afternoon when a single bullet settled the account in the only way such accounts are ever finally settled. The shamrock that flew on his Spitfire was never recaptured. It went down with him into the Channel. But the idea it represented, that a man's identity and a man's duty are not always aligned with his passport, that conscience is not the property of any nation, that never went down. That is still flying. Walk through the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire today, and you will find Finucane's name among the fallen. Visit the memorial at Hornchurch, and you will find it there too. In Dublin, there are streets and plaques and a quiet, persistent recognition of a young man who left and did not come back. The Irish Air Corps, the modern air arm of the Irish Defence Forces, has honored his memory. Documentaries have been made. Books have been written. But the truest memorial to Paddy Finucane is not made of stone or bronze. It is made of decision. Every time a person looks at an unjust situation and decides that their official status, their neutrality, their distance, their theoretical exemption from consequence, is not sufficient reason to look away, they are, in a small way, repeating what he did. Every time someone chooses to spend their comfort in the service of something larger than their comfort, the echo of that choice reaches back 70 years to a young Irishman standing in a recruiting office in September 1938, signing his name. He was 21 years old when he died. He had already lived a life that most people twice his age never approach. He had crossed the channel more times than he could count, fought in the rain and the cold and the thin air miles above the earth, brought his friends home when he could, and mourned them when he could not. He had worn his shamrock with pride and flown for a cause with everything he had. When the water took him, it took one of the finest men the Second World War produced. Not the most decorated, though his decorations were extraordinary. Not the most famous, though his fame was real, but one of the most complete, one of the most honest, one of the most authentically himself. The channel is quiet now. The Spitfire is gone. But on a summer day, if you stand on the cliffs at Dover and look south toward France across that narrow gray water, it is not difficult to imagine the sound of a Merlin engine. It is not difficult to hear, in the wind off the water, the last transmission of a young man who had already said everything that mattered with his life. This is it, chaps, and it was enough. It was more than enough. If the story moved you, if Paddy Finucane's courage reached through the years and made you feel something real, then you already understand why these stories have to be told. History does not remember every hero. It takes someone to go looking. Hit the like button if you believe that the forgotten deserve to be found. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who need to hear these stories, and the algorithm responds every single time you press it. Subscribe to WWII Ghost Wings if you haven't already. We are here every week, digging through the archives and the records and the faded letters to bring you the men and women who shape the world you're living in right now, and who have never once gotten the credit they deserve. And leave us a comment with this question. Is there another Irish, Scottish, Welsh, or Commonwealth volunteer from World War II whose story you think deserves the same treatment? Someone whose country stayed out, but who could not? Tell us below. We read every single one. Next week, we are telling the story of a man who was officially declared dead by his own Air Force, listed as killed in action, whose family received a telegram, whose name was added to Memorial Wall, and who was, at that very moment, very much alive, behind enemy lines, building something that would change the nature of resistance warfare forever. You will not see this one coming. Make sure you are subscribed because you do not want to miss it. And to everyone in this community, thank you, not just for watching, for caring, for understanding that the past is not over, and that the people who lived it are worth your time. Paddy Finucane would not have asked for your attention, but he earned it, and that is why we are here.